All right, well, we should probably get going. People might jump in, in the next few minutes, but I want to make sure we have time to get to everything that Rep. Garballey has to share with us. And maybe if I can throw in a few updates of things that are happening with DDS this week. So good morning, everybody. It's so nice to be back after a couple of weeks off. And I think I didn't do anything exciting or go anywhere, but it was nice to just kind of change up my routine a little and, let go of some responsibility for a little bit. So, but I'm really excited to be back today and to have Rep. Sean Garballey with us. I think most of you know he's been a huge humble champion for us for many, many sessions, and not just for the ARC, really for all disability advocacy organizations. We all go to him, and he seems to manage juggling all of us. And sometimes when we go to him, he already knows exactly what the issues are, and he's already on top of it. And we're just so lucky to work with him and his staff. One of the things that has just been enormous and kind of under maybe appreciated because we have so many bill priorities and things is just his consistent work on turning 22. And when I talk about like our top accomplishments over the past decade, the last 5 years we have seen such stability, and really the turning 22 line item has shifted to actually cover the needs of the growing body of students that are turning 22. And that is in such a big part due to Sean's consistent advocacy. So many other things. It's a huge champion on Nikki's Law, and now we have the higher ed bill really teed up, and it looks good again, and it's in the House, and I know he's doing so much for that, and I think he's going to update us on that. Also, he's our sponsor for the hospital training bill, and we can talk a little bit more about that either with Sean or after. There's many other bills and lots of other ways that Sean's worked with us, so it could go on forever, but I really appreciate you being here today, Sean. And if everybody could hold their questions or put them in the chat at any time, and then when Sean's done with his update, I'll go through those and we can read them together, and Carrie might help me. So I will share my screen now. Hold on. Thanks, good reminder there. Slow. Here we go. Okay, Sean, I'm turning it over to you.
Great. Well, first of all, Maura, thanks so much for doing this, and thank you to the ARC of Massachusetts for having me and having these dialogues constantly and consistently through the year. I think it's really, really important to update all of your constituents and legislators in terms of what's going on Beacon Hill, and how we can all work together to prioritize our population on very important bills that we're discussing, and matters from legislation to the budget. And more for personal privilege, I do want to say how much of a source of inspiration you are to be a mother of children with autism, and the way you carry yourself with grace, but the fierce advocacy that you do, not just as a mom, even though that's obviously very, very critical, but as someone who's advocating for young people and all people with developmental disabilities across the Commonwealth. And you do it so effectively, and the ARC of Massachusetts is very lucky to have you, as well as the other staff of the ARC who are really able to go right into offices in the legislature every single day because of the relationships you've built, and bring the stories of those you represent across the Commonwealth to the State House and to the legislative leadership and to the rank and file. It really, really is important, and it's also very successful. As you've mentioned, Nikki's Law, the Real Lives Bill, there's several pieces of legislation that we can point to that, because of your strong advocacy and the advocacy of those on this Zoom call and across the Commonwealth, why we can celebrate. But we certainly can't rest on our laurels because there are serious problems that have persisted even before COVID, and the problems that exist long before COVID, but now are even worse, exposed due to the coronavirus. And I'd just like to talk briefly about a few things. One, what's really, really important, you mentioned turning 22, and there's several other line items in the FY21 budget that we have yet to pass in the legislature that is so very, very critical and important to the population that we mutually advocate for. I'm sure you saw recently that the legislature and the governor committed not to cut local aid. And what that means is we're not going to cut, we're going to leave FY20 numbers, last year's budget numbers for Chapter 70 and unrestricted general government aid, including inflation for FY21. Now that is obviously important. We support our cities and towns, all 351. We support education, K through 12. That is important. However, we're facing multi-billion-dollar deficit. And my concern, as always, is when you say we're not going to cut local aid, that means, are you going to cut health and human services? Because there's only so much available in the pie to cut. And I want you to know that your campaign, Don't Cut Us Out, has been successful. Actually, we won't know how successful it's been until we actually start our budget deliberations. We've passed what's known as a 1/12 budget, and we've passed these until October 31st to be able to get us. And the reason we're doing this is we're trying to, one, figure out what the real budget deficit is in terms of loss of capital gains revenue and sales tax revenue, and we will know, but we really don't know right now how bad the coronavirus has caused our budget woes until we go more into the budget season. And we're also waiting to see if Washington is going to support the states who've been negatively impacted by our budgets, been negatively impacted by the coronavirus. So there are good reasons to not pass a budget yet, but however, it really is important that when we start our budget deliberations, because of the promise that we've made around local aid, we have to be fierce advocates and make sure that all of our line items that are important to the disability community, like turning 22, like transportation, the list can go on and on, like the autism waiver, that we don't cut those items. And there's a lot of things that we can do instead, looking at the expenditure budget, looking at corporate tax loopholes. There's a whole host of things that we can do, but it really, really is important that this is my opinion, that we move in this direction because we can't afford to cut DDS line items that are so important. So I just kind of wanted to give that update on the budget. And I kind of want to give an update on issues that are so important to the disability community and all of us who care about civil rights and care about this population. You mentioned the Macy bill, Maura, so I guess I will start with that. Okay. There is a wonderful program. Do you want me to stop? And
no, I just have little slides. Okay. I have little slides that go with what you're saying.
Great.
So I keep shifting around.
I'm sorry. Am I jumping ahead your slides? You can tell
Not
me.
Not at all. No, you were talking about the line items, so I put up our budget ask, and I don't know if you can see it, and it had all those line items on there, asking for maintenance. So we're right with you.
Great. Terrific. So let's talk. There's a wonderful program in Massachusetts called the Inclusive Concurrent Enrollment Program that allows students with autism and Down syndrome to go to college to one of our 29, well, many of our 29 public universities. And the experiences that they have had are amazing. and the experiences. If you look nationwide at many of the statistics of young people who've been able to go to college and take college courses, when they leave college, in terms of independence, in terms of employment, their outcomes are far superior than their peers who are not able to take those courses. And that's why this is so important. And even though many of our public universities allow students to come and take courses along with their peers, many universities in our public higher ed system do not. And so many years ago, I teamed up with Pat Haddad and Tom Sanacandro, who had filed the bill before us about 6 years ago, to really try to focus on getting this legislation passed statewide, to allow all of our young people to be able to go to college, even if they don't pass the MCAS test. The MCAS test should not be a barrier to our young people's future, who believe that even if they live with autism and Down syndrome, and they want to go to college. And we've had hearings, I think 3 times in the past 6 years. We've had amazing young people come to the committee hearings and tell their personal stories. Did courses, let's say at Bridgewater State, and how successful it made them, and how the confidence that they had taking courses with their peers, just being allowed to be in the same room to experience the same things that all their other peers experience, meant the world to them. And imagine being a young person with Down syndrome now who's leaving high school and they are not able to pass the MCAS test, but they see their peers graduating. They see their friends graduating and going off to college. And their parents have to tell them, I'm sorry, you can't go to college. You can't go to UMass Boston. You can't go to Middlesex. You can't go to Bridgewater State. And that's just wrong. And there's a huge benefit, obviously, to them as individuals, but there's a huge benefit to the general population in our classrooms to have a young person with Down syndrome and autism there with them learning. College is about, preparing everybody for the world. And the inclusiveness of having a young person with Down syndrome or autism or both in a classroom is really, really important. So where we are right now in this important bill is the Senate passed it. They passed it right in the end of what's known as regular formal session, I guess, right before July 31st of this year. They passed it completely, unanimously, without amendments. And it was passed by conservatives and moderates and progressives alike from every region of the Commonwealth supported this bill. Now it's in the House, and I do want to thank strongly Senator Lovely and Senator Rodrigues for their work in getting this bill passed. And now I'm working with Pat Haddad in the House and the ARC, and number of Julia Landau and a number of strong advocates in trying to get this legislation passed. It is so important, and to me, it's a civil right. So we need to get this passed, and I'm very hopeful, and we can talk about some of the obstacles of why the bill hasn't passed yet. But we have worked very hard with all groups, from the Massachusetts Association of School Committees to the Massachusetts Association of School Superintendents, to President Meehan of the UMass system, to our presidents in our community colleges and our state universities. Every single group that has some stake in this legislation has been heard. Their feedback has been taken and implemented in many cases. and that this bill is strong, it's comprehensive, and it's going to improve the quality of life for people with disabilities. And that's why I'm so strongly supportive of it and trying to get it passed.
Hey, Rep, before we move on, is there anything that you can tell us that we should be doing for this bill right now? I know I have the Senate bill number up, and so I wanted to say the House number is 4419 still.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yes.
So what can we do?
So, I'll give an instance. So Lynn Bishop is my constituent. I love her dearly for her advocacy. She picks up the phone on a regular basis. Well, she mostly texts me, but she'll text me, she'll call me, and she'll say, I'll give you, for instance, so Lynn is very much supportive of hazard pay. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, Lynn, but it's something that we share. It's something that's so very important for the workers across Massachusetts during this pandemic. And off work hours, she's been calling and texting me as a constituent saying that this is really important to her. So the way you get legislation passed, the way, we got IDEA passed so many years ago, the way we got the Real Lives bill, the way we got Nikki's law passed, it's not rocket science. Is you pick up the phone or you go on your email, whatever's more comfortable to you, for you, and you develop a relationship with your legislator. You ask them personally to support a bill that you find important, and then you hold them accountable. And you say to them, this is really important to me. This is important to my child. I want you to prioritize this legislation, and you hold them accountable. You as voters and as constituents have the greatest power. You have the ability to support that candidate while they're in office, and you have the ability to support other candidates who will represent your families if that rep is not speaking your hopes, your desires, and your priorities. This is not a difficult bill to pass, or it shouldn't be. Unfortunately, I will just say this. And it pains me. Nobody will tell you that they are opposed to this bill, right? Who could be opposed publicly to the idea of a young person with autism or Down syndrome being able to go to college and get the education they need just like their peers so that they can be successful? No one's going to be opposed to that. But quietly, we know that there are people in this Commonwealth who believe that someone with autism or Down syndrome may not belong on a college campus. That's their perverse view of the world. And it's not right, and we will continue to fight against that perspective. But we would be kidding ourselves if we didn't come out and say that perspective is shared. I would say under a minority, very small group of people. But sometimes it's enough to stop a bill from becoming law. And this bill, we've been trying to get past several sessions, and it has not passed. This session, the Senate has passed it, and I will say I believe the House is very, very close. Marty Meehan has strongly endorsed the bill. Our community colleges and state university presidents have come out in support of the bill. So we have all the momentum on our side to pass this bill, but we need you. So I would ask, if you support this bill, when you get off this Zoom call, to call your state rep and ask them to prioritize this bill and really try to get them to talk to the Speaker of the House and get this bill to the floor for a vote and get this passed so that all of our young people across the Commonwealth can go to college. It is so very important. Briefly, Maura, I want to talk quickly about, well, it is August 20th, the legislative session is supposed to end on July 31st. How are we still able to talk about bills getting passed? And the reason for that is right before session ended, due to the coronavirus, the pandemic that has ravaged our communities, not just here in Massachusetts, but across the Commonwealth, the legislature, in their good wisdom, decided to suspend one of their rules that mandates that we end session on July 31st and continue session into the fall. And that allows us to have discussions on many of these bills. There are many bills that are still in conference committee, like police reform, and a whole host of other important pieces of legislation that we're trying to get passed. And this, the Inclusive Concurrent Enrollment Bill, is one of those important bills that, because of extended session, we have more time to advocate. We have more time to mobilize. We have more time to work. We have more time to work with our colleagues to get many of these pieces of legislation passed. We don't know how long session will go for. I'm assuming into September, into October, maybe into November. It's hard to say. But right now we have the momentum to try to get many of these pieces of legislation passed.
Awesome. Thank you, Sean. And all of that support that's coming out of the community for the higher ed bill, you know, that is due to the dogged determination of you and Rep. Haddad and the Senate sponsors as well. So we would definitely want to do our part. And what you mentioned about accountability, I mean, if you reach out to your rep and you say, please reach out to the speaker and let me know how it goes. Let me know if you made contact, and that accountability is so important so that we know we're making a difference by our call. So thank you so much on that. And yeah, we're so lucky that the session has been extended, and we're looking forward to pushing through some important stuff.
And you know, I just want to briefly also say the bill that the ARC is very passionate about, and we share our passion, is the hospital training bill, especially during Corona, but before the pandemic and after the pandemic. You know, I think we can all agree that those individuals with autism and Down syndrome that have to go to the hospital, just like their peers, should be able to have a successful experience in the hospital. And too many times, nurses and doctors may not understand how to treat someone who lives with a disability. And so creating a team in a hospital that is prepared when someone from this population enters, it just makes sense. And it's really, really important. The Public Health Committee supported it. Right now, it's still in healthcare financing. Once it got reported out of public health, it went there. We're still trying to get it passed. It's a very important piece of legislation. It's just one that makes sense. And Maura, I don't know if you want to add anything else to the bill, but
I would say we've been tracking this one on my webinars. You know, it's near and dear to me because of Operation House Call and all the training that we're doing. Yes. But we also know that, you know, because of COVID-19, we were able to get this on the radar of the Secretary of Health and Human Services, you know, Mary Lou Sutters, and we're hoping that that will help us push it along, because, you know, we know that there are still thousands of bills that you guys need to figure out and prioritize, even with the extended session. And I'm sure a lot of them are still COVID prioritized. So, you know, so much going on locally and needing to be addressed. So somehow we really want to try to elevate this one, because we know it is COVID related. It is important that even more so now with the severity of illness that we're seeing in people with disabilities when they do enter the hospital, that people understand all they need to understand about partnering with parents and caregivers and communication and all the important things that we talk about. So same kind of advice here, Rep, that we should reach out to our reps, ask them to, you know, prioritize this, talk to the speaker, get back to us.
you know, fortunately, just like with any bill, and there's 5,000 bills that get filed every 2 years, the recipe for success is really the same with every bill. You know, some bills are more difficult to get passed than others, depending on the nature and who is opposed to it. But from the perspective of a constituent, a phone call, you may not be able to do a face-to-face meeting during this pandemic. A phone call or an email is something that is really, really important. Guess what? Everyone's coming up for re-election on September 1st. There's many reps who have opposition on September 1st. There's many reps who have opposition in the general election in November. You know, I wouldn't say threaten them, but, you know, you can certainly say that this is important to you, your family, and you'll be watching what kind of advocacy they do trying to get this bill passed. There's no doubt that some reps work day in and day out to get a bill passed, and at the end of the day, sometimes the bill doesn't pass for a whole host of reasons. We worked 6 years trying to get insurance companies to be mandated for the cost of children's hearing aids. And that took year after year after year, and it just made sense. And the reason
We lose them all together? Sean, we lost you. There you are. We lost you for a minute. Wait, unmute. There you go.
Of Zoom. The pitfalls of Zoom.
Right, right. Can you unmute, Sean?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, it's weird. It still says you're muted, but I can hear you. Okay, there you go.
Okay, my apologies.
No problem. You're
See,
back.
I'm in the insurance lobby, and they try to cut me out. But we won't let that happen.
No.
So, you know, we just need to be persistent and continue to work for these bills, and having the dialogue with your rep is really, really important. So that's just really, really dope. The other piece of legislation I just want to briefly mention, Maura, is the bill that I view as a companion piece to Nikki's law, and that is the bill that I filed with Senator Keenan on the Senate, the DPPC, which would update the practice and terminology of the Disabled Persons Protection Commission. To me, in order for Nikki's law to do the great work that is mandated under the law, it really, really is important to update the terminology and the best practices of the DPPC. The Senate passed it unanimously. I'm hoping the House will pass it soon. In the fall, I believe that's when we're going to take it up. So that's just another piece of legislation I did want to mention.
Oh, that's really great to know, Sean, because I think that slipped off my radar in terms of trying to prioritize. And we are a little recently more concerned about implementation of Nikki's law due to the COVID-19 crisis, kind of bumping back funding, bumping back timing for agencies. So not sure if we're going to have to dive in with some more advocacy around implementation, but I know that's a key piece in it. So we'll bring that up to on our list of priorities as well. Thank you.
Right. Implementation, I'd say, is the most important piece of it, right? We need to make sure we protect. And the two other things more I just want to mention is, you know, we need to fight for people with disabilities before COVID, after COVID, but also during COVID. And the fact is, what this pandemic has shared with the people of Massachusetts and the people across the country is that the safety nets are being cut, and we are ill prepared to support, in my opinion, the most vulnerable around us. The fact that we don't have hazard pay for the workers in our group homes and across the Commonwealth who are doing the essential work of trying to keep their kids, their peers safe is inexcusable. If you are a grocery worker working during the COVID, you should get hazard pay. If you're working in a group home, you should be getting hazard pay. It just makes sense. The bill is still in labor and workforce development. We're trying to get it passed. Another legislation that's just as important that I filed this session along with Paul Donato is the emergency sick time legislation. We don't know what the fall will bring. You know, we are under the impression that, based on the experts from public health officials, that we could be facing another difficult bout with this pandemic sometime in the middle of October.
Oh no. There he goes. Unmute there. Wait, we need you to unmute. There you go.
And can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. You're just popping around the screen. We got you now.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. So
That's okay.
thank you for bearing with me.
No problem.
So we all will look like, and we will be taking everything, we will be doing everything we can as a society, from wearing masks to staying 6 feet apart, to do our part in curbing this pandemic. But the legislature also has to do their part in making sure we pass some of these pieces of legislation, from emergency sick time to hazard pay, and making sure that all those are included, from grocery workers to group home workers, to our teachers, to our social workers, to our nurses, to our doctors. There's a whole host of individuals that should be included that are protecting us. So I just wanted to leave you with that, and I look forward to answering your questions.
That's fantastic, Sean. Maybe I can grab those bill numbers and I'll send them out to everybody when we send the slides from the webinar today. So
Terrific.
we can go ahead and support those bills as well. And let's take a look at the chat questions here. I see a couple. Okay, so Lucy wants to know, many individuals with high functioning autism or mental illness or other disabilities are not eligible for the current bill. Any thoughts on expanding the services of the bill to those who do not have intellectual disabilities but need an array of services in college? So mental health and no intellectual disability.
Yes, so that's a very, very important issue, and one that we've talked very closely with Mary Lou Sutters about. And one of the pieces of legislation that we have filed as a companion piece to the Macy bill is to set up a commission to look, and a commission with real teeth, to look at mental health and to look at all of the needs that students need in college to succeed. And that's including our population, that's including those with mental health needs. And she really is interested in getting this bill passed and getting to work. And to me, it's very, very important. So we are working very hard to try to get this passed along with our bill as well.
Awesome, thank you. Let's see, I think we had a question about the teachers being included in the hazard pay. Is that currently in the bill to include teachers?
I was getting so my understanding, speaking with Maria Robinson, who's been such a strong advocate for this bill, is that it's broad right now. So they are included, and a whole host of occupations are included. And so I think that's part of the debate that we're having, and part of the discussion in terms of how broad do we make hazard pay. And so I think that one has not passed, but I do believe that we need to have a discussion in terms of who should be included and try to get this passed. And, you know, let's face it, we are heading into a unclear predicament for schools across the Commonwealth. My hope was that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and this governor would make standards statewide. but we've been left to, communities have been left for the most part on their own to come up with their recommendations on how to, and if they can at all, open schools safely. And no matter what they decide, whether it's a hybrid model or full remote, teachers are essential workers, and they definitely should be part of any hazard pay legislation that moves forward.
Absolutely. Okay, I think we have one more question here about identifying reps who are leaning towards the passage of, I think, the higher ed bill, so that we can urge them. Is it a good idea to go ahead and support those reps that are really working on it, or just stick with our own rep, or what do you think?
So there's a whole host of there's a whole host of state reps, and obviously every single state senator who strongly support this bill. And what I love is the stories I hear. So Paul Tucker is a state rep in Salem. He's the former police chief. And one of the things that he does is he's an adjunct professor. I believe it was at Salem State, or it's in that region.
He is, yeah.
And what he told me was the amazing experience he had one of our students in his classroom.
That's
and, you know, he may not have been completely supportive of the bill in the beginning. I think he was, but, you know, there might be those who are skeptical. And he had the experience of having one of these amazing young people in his class. And he told me, he said, Sean, I benefited, the students benefited, the students' peers benefited, and our campus benefited by having these students on the campus. What an enriching experience it was for the student and for those who had the pleasure of interacting with the student, his or her peers. And to me, those are what changes hearts and minds. That's how you get a bill like this passed. And so as Chris said, you know, you can look, there's a whole host of co-sponsors on the bill. What I am really engaged in right now is, you know, as we said earlier, 5,000 bills get filed every 2 years. And even during this discussion, I've mentioned several important pieces of legislation. And I wish we lived in a world where we could say, okay, this is the menu. All of these bills will pass. Terrific. You know, it's like opening up the menu to the Cheesecake Factory. You know, there's about 30 pages of the menu, and it's impossible to go through it. It would be great that the legislature worked the same way, where you had all these bills that could get passed and all at once we did it, but that's not the way it works. And legislators have so much time in a session to be able to prioritize. And what I'm working on is trying to get members of the House to prioritize the higher education bill and to go to the speaker, go to the chairman of Ways and Means, talk with your colleagues about why this bill is so important. You know, and I really believe this, no representative is going to tell you they're opposed to the bill, right? I'm looking for champions. I'm looking for people who are going to champion this legislation, just like the autism teams at hospitals, the hazard pay legislation, the sick time. I want legislators who are going to say, this is the bill that I'm prioritizing, and I'm going to work to get it passed. That's how bills get passed. We have legislators who prioritize, and then we have advocates like the ARC of Massachusetts and other advocates across the Commonwealth who partner with legislators, and together we come up with a strategy of success and being able to get a bill over the goal line and passed and signed into law. And I think right now, one of the successful things we have going for us is already, before we head into the fall, one of the legislative bodies passed this bill. And they did so unanimously, without amendment. And now we're halfway there, and we just need the House to pass it. So I feel very good about it, but obviously there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
I have one more question for you. I know we're running over, But you
No, no
explained
problem.
this, okay, you explained this very well on another call we were on. And just, can you explain a little bit about how the informal session is going to work going forward and what's really possible to get through in an informal?
Sure. So it's a great question. So we have in the legislative world, we have a formal session and we have an informal session. And the difference is under our Constitution, our wonderful Massachusetts Constitution that John Adams drafted so many years ago, right? Under a law, the legislature has to meet every 72 hours. And an informal session meets that requirement. So what is an informal session? So as you know, 160 members serve in the House of Representatives. There's a lot of pieces of legislation that need to get passed, from sick leave banks to what we call home rule petitions that are not deemed controversial. And that means they're going to pass unanimously. So an informal session is when we pass bills that don't require a roll call vote because they're not deemed as controversial. Now, during an informal session, any member of the House can object to a bill moving forward, which means that bill is not unanimously supported and then needs to get passed in a formal session. So there are several bills that I'm hoping that we can get passed in an informal session that I believe are unanimously supported. The higher education bill is supported by many, many Republicans, many, many Democrats. The minority leader, Brad Jones, is strongly in support of this bill. So my hope is we can get this passed in an informal session. But it only takes one member of the House to object to a bill being passed. And so that's why I am advocating for it to get passed when we head back into formal session, whether it be now or in September, or an informal session. But I'm going to use every avenue I have to try to get this bill passed.
Awesome. That helps.
Did I answer it, Maura?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, we always think of what bills have we prioritized that could potentially go in that, route through an informal, especially now with all the local bills that need to get through. So it's good to get a good sense of that. And maybe there'll be one or two that we can push in that direction, before the end of the year. So we'll loop back with you if there's any of those.
Absolutely.
But I don't see any other questions. Does anyone have anything else for the rep? You can unmute if you have anything. I just really want to thank you so much, Rep. You sound like one of us when you talk about advocacy for people with disabilities, and we really appreciate that. And we know a lot of these issues that the House is working on and the Senate are really complex. And so we know it takes a lot of digging in, and we really, really appreciate that. And we want to stay closely in touch. So I will send out, yeah.
Great. Well, I appreciate your strong advocacy, Maura, and a lot of the people who are on this call are incredible advocates. And so we have plenty of time to get some of these pieces of legislation passed, and I look forward to working with you in the months ahead.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I know that we're running behind, but if anyone wants to take a quick zip through the rest of my slides and get an update, stay on. If you don't, no problem, and we'll see you next time. So thanks, Sean. All right, I'm going back to my screen.
Thank you, Sean.
Lots of thanks in the chat, Sean. Okay, so we talked about, I wanted to let everybody know quickly that the budget ask that Sean mentioned around the DDS budget and the line items is now available on our website, and you can click on the link and send it directly to your rep and senator. And it outlines exactly what we need. We need them to maintain these line items. We also mention in our budget ask to help us maintain the Chapter 257 reserve for the workforce. And this really fits into what the rep was talking about around hazard pay. I mean, we have been looking for increased just pay equity for our workforce for so long. And then this, crisis came on where they were put in the front lines and having to act incredibly heroic for such a long period of time. So it's even more important that we have a stable rate for our workforce that encourages them to come back, to stay in the field after some of them have had a bit of traumatic experiences. And so it's really critical that we still keep pushing for the workforce initiative while we maintain all those DDS budget line items. So that's in there for you guys. I think if a lot of you were on Leo's webinar, you probably heard about the day program rate release, and I just wanted to thank everyone. A lot of this was due to the advocacy of Don't Cut Us Out. But we still have a lot of uncertainty around the day programs, and they have lower volumes, less people attending in person. And we have to continue to advocate for the short-term and the long-term needs of community-based day services and day hub programs. And I think I said at the beginning of Don't Cut Us Out that our goal was really to try to stabilize the day programming so that they did not have to close their doors. But now, oops, typo. But now that they're stabilized for now, we can also start working on advocacy around what needs to shift. What can we work on now that will better fit the needs of individuals with IDD and autism in their day programs? And so that was the goal all along. So you'll hear more about how we're going to work together with partners like the Disability Law Center and others to really take a good look at what day programs need to look like. So that's
more.
Also, yeah.
I'm sorry, this is Dennis. I'm also wondering about what needs to be done for folks who are not in day rehabilitation programs or in residential programs to make sure that they're getting the services they require. And that's a big subject, but I'm thinking particularly around prevention strategies for COVID-19 coming around again, a second wave. So did you guys have thoughts on that? Because that's something that's very much on our mind, and what can be done to advocate with the state to ensure that all these folks who are in community settings are getting their needs met.
Dennis, I so appreciate you asking that question, and it's been on my mind to actually ask you to come on as a guest. I have to say that people in independent living and those at home need more advocacy. So that has to be a wave of advocacy that we take on. And I'd love to talk to you offline about coming on and talking to us more about those that are in independent living.
But I know I always have I think independent living, and that's just about, I think of everyone. I'm particularly thinking right now about folks who are not getting their needs met because schools are closed, they're younger kids, they've got IDD, DD, and what parents are going to do. But then also once kids turn 22, a lot of folks stay home, and you this stuff, and so who's watching out for them? Because we know the LTSS needs are not being met, and so how do we make sure that at least the medical preventative strategies are being met? And so, yeah, I look forward to talking. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that would be great, and of course those family support line items and some of the other line items will help, but we do need to get a focus on that given the more complex issues.
And it's a crisis. We're in a crisis right now, and families don't need any more than they already have on their plates.
Absolutely. Okay, I'll follow up with you. And I also wanted people to know, if they don't, you'll get these slides, but we have some guidance on surveillance testing, which a lot of people were very interested in. And it's a very long document, but if you want to look through it, it gives some good information on what the guidance will be for programs doing surveillance testing for those over 22. And also compensatory service guidance came out. So that could be a whole nother webinar. So I won't keep everybody, but those are the links, and you can definitely check them out, and we'll probably be circling back on compensatory, maybe with Kathleen at another time. So there's my guy with his adorable mask. And thank you everybody for hanging in there a little bit longer today. And we're so lucky to have Rep. Garballey and know that he's continuing to work so hard for us. So I hope everybody has a great week and stay safe. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye everybody. Thank you.
Great job, Maura.